Phyllis. We're going to have a great conversation, and I might ask you things that you and I have talked about many times in the past weeks, but for tonight, let's pretend we have this conversation for the very first time.
First of all, I'm an Instagram junkie. Very kind people who have seen my Instagram images asked me to do a book. So I was sort of doing another big book, and I asked a young and talented and excellent young man if he would take on the job. His name is David Siren. David, are you here? Where are you?
Here, on the back.
Oh, great. Great. And so the idea of doing a book was daunting, of course. And so I said, that's right. He went through 3,000 images and choosing some 200 we had decided on. We discussed, of course, what it should be, but more or less. And then it was increased to 300 at the request of Lars Müller, an extraordinary, I don't know if many of you know his publications, but they just are so wonderful. When you see this book, you'll see how wonderful it is. They format of the book, the graphics, and when you open the book, as Mark Daniel said, it lies flat, which is quite extraordinary. And then, there you are. And the images, the quality, well, first of all, the graphics, the way the pages are laid out, the grid he gave, but the quality of the reproduction is so beautiful. The blacks, I compared the blacks in this book to one that we did in CCA right at the very beginning, 45 years ago, whatever it was, which I thought was a marvelous book. And these blacks glimmer, they scintillate, they're not flat. It's quite an amazing thing. So, I maybe took the photographs, but without David and his persistence and his talent and his care and his undertaking all those curatorial things, he was so good, he became the curator of the book. And the work of Lars, Lars Müller Publishers, you could take these photographs and make a lousy book out of them too. So I think that's very important. And then there are also people at the CCA I want to thank. CCI sort of have an office here, and everybody's very kind and does things. And I have, since 2004, a most marvelous archivist, and his name is Glenn Brown. Because he, without his care and being able to look after the documents and put them in the right order, nobody would have been able to work. Nobody would have been able to find them. But a week ago, he left this world, and we were all shocked because the week before we were just talking to him. He was here. And so I'm afraid I'm a little teary-eyed about it. But so I'd like to dedicate this book launch to Glenn Brown. Thank you, Glenn.
Yes, Instagram junkie. I noticed also that your first review of the book was on Instagram, and if I may quote Mark Daniel Meyer, he wrote early praise, and he said, "Observation is a constant that underlies all approaches, is a book of pictures first, then an aggregate, oblique self-portrait. Only after that it is a book about places. Her photographs, your photographs, are details from a personal canon of places, things and people. They point mostly to the world of architecture over which Phyllis Lambert has long presided. But this isn't a book about architecture, nor a gazetteer or a collection of souvenirs. It's made up of notes taken on the fly over a lifetime of observation. disembodied close-ups of a notable life and of the world. Phyllis, the book is so intimate and formal that you want to call her Phyllis, catches most of her subjects from an unexpected angle. Often they are cropped down, tied to essentials, which favors the book's discrete format. Maybe it's just a shot of nothing in particular, nowhere special, that she liked one instant long ago. An instant that she found pleasing to remember next to the newer moments, so an instant that refuses to end. Phyllis, you've made an amazing book. It's warm, it's elegant, it's also has this kind of nonchalance of the savoir-vivre.
That's funny.
And you welcome really the people in your book. And I was wondering, also reflecting on the title, what does an observation mean to you?
Well, you know, I've been, as a child, 10 years old, I took sculpture lessons. And I exhibited in the annual juried shows here in the spring shows at the Musée des Beaux-Arts when I was very small. But I had a wonderful sculpture teacher, and he used to say to me, now you go out of the room, come back as Mrs. Jones or Madame Truchon, and take a look at what Phyllis has been doing and criticize it. And I learned self-criticism, but also, of course, in sculpture, as you're learning, you're always observing. And so I guess that's how, that's the thing about learning to look. You can talk about that subject a lot, but I want to give more an idea of how I proceeded in this, because all these books, this is the first time, I never planned, as I said, to do a book, and there are travel sketches, there are travel images, there are photographs of friends, but the friends are always involved somehow in my work as an architect, and there are places where my work took me. It took me to, for example, with different organizations. There are also the photographs I took during with different instruments of small format cameras. And during the pandemic, I used the iPhone, and it was extraordinary the way that changed. Each camera made you work differently and think differently, but having an obvious in the palm of your hand, the small instrument that you see something and you say and then you try something else with it. It was just amazing. Some people wanted me to do just those images, but I'd done so many for many years that there's quite many of the images. Usually it says in my house, that's where they were taken. I first of all, I worked with black and white, of course, because I'm talking about the 60s, 1960s. I guess the first image in the book is the head of a skull of a ram, I think it is, that I did at Yale with a large format camera. I was being trained, of course, to take the photograph, develop it, etc., etc. But most of them were taken with black and white, first of all. And then I started to use color because I wanted to talk to my classmates at architectural school and show them ideas that I had or what I'd seen or analyze what I'd seen, make these wonderful slideshows. And so then I turned to using colored photographs, both negative and slides, and then of course the Instagram. The points of view, the fall of light, the reflection, and my immediate surroundings were intensified for me with the advent of the iPhone. Yes, I got ahead of myself, that's all right. And a whole new realm of observation opened. Light captured where it barely exists, the fleeting moment fixed, the subjective experience heightened, and all became possible with the constant availability of the palm-sized instrument. So that gives, I think, a little bit of the trajectory of observing.
It's interesting to hear about your formative years being spent as a sculptor, because leafing through the book, I thought, this is a sculptural eye at work. Also an architect, but very much a sculptural eye, looking at the details, looking at ripples in stone, looking at formations, masses, volumes of buildings, and maybe architecture is a form of sculpture as well. But I also noticed this very strong affinity with the cinematic. It's in the way that you take photographs on the fly sometimes, but also in devising these panoramas that open up to the viewer and sort of engulf him. So I'm just going to show you a few. And then you have these multiple images that are really almost like a storyboard already for the camera moving around the site. Can you say something more about your affinity with the cinema?
Yes, well, just, I never really photographed buildings as such, and I don't go out and take a formal photograph of a building. That was not my interest at all. I was interested in the edges of where the building was, of course the light and all those things about it, but also the composition that one saw, and how one could give a sense of it. And it was just, as for me, really, just pure pleasure looking in through the lens. I started off with, for years, and I think quite a long time, I couldn't break away from the 100 millimeter lens, see things up close. And then I forced myself to use a wide-angle lens, which was a little disastrous at first, but it's always that great pleasure of looking through the lens. So, and also, I love the single image. The photographs you had just a minute ago showing the Cape Sunion, and that I started off, kept on moving around, so that I came up, you saw the columns of the temple at one angle, and then I got closer and you saw it from the other angle. And that's what I was the one who was seeing this, projected for you. But I found that thrilling. And, I did I also did cinema. Oh, well, I did 3 slides, first of all, because when showing my colleagues at Yale and I, not at Yale actually, at IIT where I took my degree, and Illinois Institute of Technology in Chicago. And I did cemeteries, because I found, when you go to a town, you have a great sense of what a place is like if you go to visit the cemetery. Really, it's quite interesting. We don't have any of them tonight because we had too many, we cut them out. but you see them in the book, some of them anyway. And then there were places I went, for example, in Guatemala, in the Chichicastenango, this wonderful village off in the hills, and the life of the chicken feathers that were put on a grave, and the sensing at Christmas time in the markets, and the way the fences grew. These were all kind of marvelous scenarios, and I could make a slideshow of them, and I did use them with 3 screens. Yes, this in Fula. This is in what now used to be Yugoslavia. No, what is it called now?
I think it's now in Croatia.
Yeah, Croatia, exactly. Yeah, and so this one I photographed very specifically, so I would be able to make this screen this way.
That's interesting for me, because I'm not used to these slideshows, but I look at a lot of photography, and I always connected this image with like the panorama photographs from like the 19th century. But it's for a presentation. It's like super secret good info to have.
Well, I also did, when I came back to Montreal in the 70s, and everything was starting to be knocked down, I did a lot of slideshows, for working with, well, there's a young man looking at him right now who did a film. There goes our neighborhood, Bruce McNiven. But I didn't do films. I did, images. And then I also did for one of the radio stations, got up at 3 o'clock in the morning when they had time, and I worked with them to edit the for a radio station. And I also did a film, a real film, but it was with single images, because I found that to be able to take the moment and to move it in so many different ways. This was a film for my father's 90th birthday, which was called Father, a Family Portrait. And so there were lots of 3 generations of images, but I took a lot of the images specifically for this film, knowing that I was going to do it. So, but also you showed other images that have a kind of sense of movement, or I mean, there always is a sense of movement, but yes.
Yeah, they do. I mean, this image, for instance, that it's very cinematic for me.
That's in India. That's.
Pardon me.
Yes, and this is in Mexico, in Oaxaca.
I think everyone in the room with us tonight knows what an incredible resume you have. And for those who don't, I can recommend the amazing profile that was written by Sylvia Levin in the current edition of the Architectural Review on the occasion of the 2023 Ada Louise Huxtable Prize that you received for contribution to architecture. You've always occupied several roles as architect, as photographer, as commissioner of the Seagram building, but also as passionate collector of prints, drawings, books, and photographs, many, many photographs. And what I wondered as I went through the book with the almost 300 images is how these different roles have interacted over time for you, and what influence, if any, has it had for you to look at these large quantities of historical photographs for your own image making?
Well, I only started collecting in 1972 photographs. And I was photographing, as I said, the first photograph I took was in '60 at Yale. That I have in the book. I think took photographs. I guess the first photographs I took actually were when the Seagram building. I was thinking of what a building, a new building in a city could be like. And so I used my camera to look at Rome, not a bad place, to look at buildings and their sites. And so that's how I sort of started. So that's in 53, 54. And so that's a long time, from 53 to 54 to 72. So I'd been looking for, and as a sculptor, and so I'd been looking for a long time. Oh, I think that the major thing about that was in historian, from the level of historians, because of course I took courses in art and architectural history as an undergraduate, and then of course went to architectural school. That was in the 59 I went to architecture, to Yale, yes, and then to IIT. And then but many of the photographs, and an awful lot of the work you see here, it's not necessarily work, it's pleasure, was taken in conjunction with being an architect. So that with the International Confederation of Architectural Museums, we held annual conferences, first in the Scandinavian countries, starting with Finland, followed by Poland, Russia, Germany, Slovenia, Holland, England, France, Spain, of course. And I visited numerous times some of these places. And with the Society of Architectural Historians, I joined a study tour on Russia. We went between Moscow and St. Petersburg, looking at the monasteries, early monasteries. And that also brought an incredible sort of indigenous kind of classical architecture. And then I went with Barry Bergdahl and Dietrich Neumann on a tour of Mies when I was doing the first book on Mies in America. Also, some of the theaters I studied when I was doing the Sadie Bronfman Center, which is now called the Siegel Center. And there was a wonderful seating shell in that, which, if you could believe, was removed. Nobody protected that building. Anyway, I don't like that very much. And then, then any conferences. This was a series of conferences that was put together by Cynthia Davidson and Peter Eisenman, which was the idea to stimulate dialogue between architecture and general culture. And this went for 10 years, at the last end of the 20th century, just in the 20th. So we went to many, Tokyo, we flew in Barcelona, Rotterdam, and of course we went to Los Angeles, we went to Montreal, went to Paris. And so in these places, of course, there was always, not study trips, but there was always fascinating things that one hadn't seen before. Oh, the picture you have on the screen now is wonderful. This is in St. Louis on the right, and that's the Bucky Fuller dome of the climatarian there, of the St. Louis, Minnesota, Botanic Gardens. They're, of course, reflected in the pool. And on the left was in my apartment in Chicago, which was one Mises' great glass skyscraper, 860 Lakeshore Drive. And I remember frantically trying to remove this wonderful glass when friends came for dinner. One of my friends, Peter Carter, said, "But that's the wonderful thing, you don't get in other buildings." So of course then I realized, and I didn't try to remove it. But
now I'd like to look with you at a few pages from the book.
I beg your pardon? Okay, yes.
Because I'd like to ask you about some of the images.
Oh, you see, here's that wonderful seating shell. Isn't it gorgeous? You see the man standing underneath it. I told Mies that I stood under it when they took the forms away, and he said, "You shouldn't have done that. You should have had the engineer to stand it."
And when you photograph people, and there are quite a few portraits in the book, you tend to photograph them in the middle of doing something. None of these images, they seem posed. They show how life happens. So can you take me or us through a few of them? Here we have...
Oh, that's wonderful. François Delegray, are you here? That is François Delegray on the right. That's a photo, a great sculpture that I have Rodin's Pierre de Wesson. And in my apartment in Chicago, because he went around with me when I moved. And on the left is, in the opposite direction, a Kouros in one of the islands in Greece, Kos, I believe it was. And Kouros, of course, was thousands of years ago, and he was faulty. There was a crack found. You see how they excavated it from the stone, and he was faulty. They found it, so they didn't continue making the statue.
I love this one.
These are great friends of mine. It's Terry Damisch on the left, and in Belle-Île, 1 year, and then Hubert Damisch on the right, putting his coat on. Little children put their coats on that way too. Wonderful. On the left is, I worked on a project in Egypt. I didn't take many photographs there, although Richard Pear did, and we did a book called The Fortifications in the Synagogue. This is Old Cairo, and this is in the desert, and there the resident architect who we'd gotten to work on the conservation is there with two people from the Institution for Conservation in Egypt, and Nimet Riyad, who was a woman from Egypt. I think her father had been prime minister, and her grandfather. And she was living in Ottawa, and she was a conservator, so that all the objects had to be removed from the synagogue when they were going to, when it had to be worked on. She was a good friend, and so I love that picture. And then there's another car to the right, and that's a friend of mine who, he was with Henvar Redukiewicz, doing the film on the Seagram building, which never really got off the ground. And his name is Ricky Leacock, and he was one of the people that was at MIT experimenting with the sound 8mm movie camera, and that's my dog with him. And that was in Montreal. This is not Bogart. This is Pitts, because he was so small, the young one. And on the right is Richard Pear. This was after a day out shooting in Montreal in the deep snow in the winter. And it was with Richard. Actually, this is how I got back to Montreal, really. I was in Chicago, and I was doing a course in urban history, city history, and I wanted to have a sense of what it was like on the ground, how a city actually grew as you could sense it. And so he used a large format camera, which I sort of I went around, of course, with my 35mm camera, seeing what places, what time of the day it was best for the sun to rake the buildings, and so we did something that I'm still working on now. This is about 1972. That's in my mother's house. I didn't even live here yet. And so that's more or less a history of bringing me back to Montreal. That on the left is marvelous. Cedric Price. I think you all know. We have a good his archives here at the Montreal, and just that wonderful. There's so much that photograph sort of tells so much about him. The stiff collar and his great humor. This is in his great office in Aldred Street in London. And to the right is a photograph I took of Arthur Erickson, who in one of the houses he did in one of his houses in Vancouver. Well, this is, of course, also in Greece. I think this was in Rhodos. And on the right was a great friend of mine, Joyce Whelan. And I'm very happy to say that there's going to be a major exhibition of hers at the AGO in Toronto, of course, and at the Museum of Fine Arts, Musée des Beaux-Arts, here in Montreal. And I think there's another photograph of her coming. Yes, I love that. You see, it was her birthday. And so I love the way she's standing, sort of very happy, but very shy. Then on the right is it's a marvelous place, the Sharon Temple in Ontario. It was her birthday. She wanted to go there. That place was just being saved at that point. And now it's, I think, a going concern very happily. An amazing place, wooden construction, wonderful inside. And with Jean Boggs, who was the greatest curator of the head curator of the director of the Musée des Beaux-Arts, Jean-Marc, with all due respect. She was just a marvelous, marvelous woman. She'd been she'd been director of the Musée des Beaux-Arts here in Montreal before that. Anybody recognize this man? The knife on the right has nothing to do with his character. And he's reading a book on that's Frederick Evans, I believe, that you're looking at. No, it isn't Frederick Evans. Who is it? It's one of the people in the...
Walker Evans?
Yeah. And so I was there for a weekend. And, I don't know, I just said, "Hi, Jeffrey," and looked up. And, none of the photographs I take are posed. I think that's, they're lifeless when they're posed. You're either going to grin or, you get this or, I don't know, something strange.
Yeah, it's really nice to see how many people are in the book. We've arrived at my last question.
What happened to Walker Evans?
That wasn't my last question. You can ask after. Architecture plays a leading role throughout the book, of course, and it's clear that you love looking at patterns and structures, but maybe above all at stones and rocks, both as material found in nature as in the built environment. And does this connect closely to your love for the greystone buildings in the city, which, as you said, is also the subject of your next book? How does your city grow? And maybe you can tell us something about this exciting next project, because you've done a book and you're going to do another book right after. My goodness. Yeah.
Well, this is, I actually put down, I couldn't, my faulty memory, so I put down the names of the things. That was Liverpool, the first one was Liverpool Station in London, and the anatomical, I took that in 74, and in 72, a few years before, it's the anatomical theatre, operating theatre in Uppsala, Sweden. And it's that wonderful reflection of the lights on from the other side of the room. It's sort of fascinating seeing those two together. And the next one, that's a door swing. One finds that on quite many of the ancient sites. It's door swing that is engraved in the stone, because you had to have somehow to guide it. And on the right is one of the most extraordinary temples in Greece, in Basai, and there's a coffered ceiling, and of course, I don't know if you can see the beautifully incised lines in it. And the feet in that, I don't think I took any good photographs of the feet, because otherwise they'd be here. But the feet, the columns, instead of going straight down, or various level of moldings around the base, they're like elephants' feet, so they're just extraordinary. This is marvelous. These are wonderful. The one on the left is in Sicily, I believe. No, that's in Apulia, and it's Port Monopoly. That is amazing, that very ancient port in the walls, the thick wall. And then right next to it, of course, what buildings were built yesterday. And that absolutely intrigued me. And on the right is the Baroque villa of Trissino Marzotti. That's only because Marzotti owns it now, in Vincenza. And it's a extraordinary place, and lots of 18th century things that has been revived and refashioned many times. But what intrigued me was the way the corner was made with those stones, and of course rough stone. I don't know whether around it. I don't know. I think whether they were going to actually show the stone and then plaster it over. I don't know, but it's such an extremely interesting structure. On the left is a marble quarry in Paros, the island in Paros in the Cyclades. And that great stone mass on the right is the Cologne Cathedral. It has a huge major history of never being finished, but just the stoniness of that is so extraordinary. On the right is an exhibition in New York of a man who's the head of the School of Conservation at Columbia University. And he's also an artist. He's done marvelous work on dust. He's cast whole rooms to get the sense of the dust. And so you don't see, of course, the whole point of the exhibition was what you saw on the floor, on the horizontal light tables on the floor. But the way the light glimmered in that room, it was what intrigued me. Well, on the left, of course, are those extraordinary rock tombs in Fethiye, I believe it is Fethiye in Turkey. And on the right is Nalapuram in Tamil Nadu, and it's something to do with the great history of the river. It goes on, it's a very long. Okay. These are Montreal. These are photographs taken with Richard Pear and myself. We started taking these photographs in 72, and I've been working off and on this ever since. Some of you might remember that I think it was in 2013, I had an exhibition of buildings as evidence, the Greystone buildings of Montreal. And first of all, I took these photographs with Richard, and there's a kind of, there are tons of photographs of Montreal, but they're all sort of a building. But Richard's photographs always have this wonderful presence in them, and of course, with all these, if I'm telling you some of the places, I can't remember the names, but always that I say, oh dear, I want to know more about this. Well, of course one wanted to know more about the buildings. For example, why were they there? What was the site they're sitting on? Who was responsible for the building being made? Who owned it? Who lived in it first? And just with that information, just walking around the city, you can tell so much. You start to see that there are differences in neighborhoods around the city, the various wards or quartiers that existed that went right back to the Sulpician land subdivisions from the 18th century. And so Montreal underlies the whole, the Sulpician subdivisions underlie the whole island. And on the right is, of course, just above here, it is the great Sulpician domain and those two towers were in 1685 the first fortification in stone in Montreal. And of course there were two in the back, and there was a wall in between them. And that had been created in order to protect a camp of indigenous populations that had been displaced, but some of them had been, there were different tribes, different nations, but they were people who had become Christianized because they moved from where they had been displaced to near the river where there was no good agriculture. And anyway, the whole, their camp burnt down. And so they moved to Sault-au-Recollet on the northern back, and then finally moved elsewhere. But so these two towers are just quite moving. And then, of course, behind is the seminar that was in Old Montreal. It's also 1685, first building in Montreal to stay standing with these two towers. But what is so fascinating about this is that the buildings of evidence, yes, that is a case study of looking at buildings and getting a sense and learning about what those buildings tell you about the city, about the people who live there, about the economics, the religion, the linguistics, everything you can think about the city. And so that book is, well, there are 7 chapters that are pretty well in good shape, but they still need some finishing, but that'll be out, I would think, in a year and a half. So I'm very excited about that book too. But this one, and the other book, if Lars, and supposedly Lars is going to do it, we have to see. But the fact is that I hope he does, because the quality that he brings to books is so wonderful. So that is what I have to say.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Phyllis. And now that we are closing the book, as you see, we have the back of the book with the text. We're now opening the session to the audience for 15 minutes of Q&A. I'm sure that there's a lot of people who have burning questions. Oh, I see already. Mark, you have take the first.
Thank you for the marvelous book and for the excellent elucidation. I have a question. Have you ever changed your mind about a building after having photographed it?
You know, that's a very interesting question. There's one photograph in the book of the Acropolis, and it's of the Eric Taylor? Yes, but but you see the part of the architheum on the right that is just 2 columns, or 3 columns maybe. And the columns are very straight. And they look in engineering you call something L over R, length over radius. And the length over radius is very ungrateful here. And there's no emphasis. They're just like that. And next to it, of course, is this wonderful top of the network structures that Fry Otto did in Montreal for Expo 67. I think that was in Montreal. He also did one in Munich for the thing. They're in the book. And I look at this and I say, you know, I'm just surprised at how ugly these columns are.
Yes, more hands. Thank you.
Bonsoir, Phyllis. Je vous suis sur Instagram depuis 4 ou 5 ans et je remarque que les photos que vous postez sur Instagram n'ont absolument rien à voir avec les photos qu'on a vues ce soir. C'est 2 mondes très, très différents. Maybe one would expect to see photos such as the one contained in your book on your Instagram account. And so what is the difference of language in terms of the Instagram versus a book?
You know, each instrument you use has a different use and purpose. Instagram was a phone originally. Of course, it's become something else. But, you know, it is something that's perpetually with you. And so that means that, you know, you're sitting here, I'm looking at this, I might take a photograph of this because I think, oh, there's something very interesting about the way that wire is underneath the stool, you know. That's, but when you're taking, but when I'm taking buildings, I'm sure that they're, well, of course, most of the Instagram photographs in the book are taken during the pandemic, so that I was forced into my house. And so over and over again, I did many of the same things, looking out the window to the north, to the south, and or west and east it is actually, and also the plants, corners, brooms, chairs, whatever. And of course, there's a level of intimacy that goes with the Instagram that does not belong to the large format camera. Because, you know, you have to set it up, and it's a big deal, and you have to say the person, smile, or, you know, very, very hard to do any kind of snapshot in a way. And, you know, it's a formal instrument, and so I think that they explain themselves.
Thank you for explaining this wonderful book. I just wanted to know, and the question just arrived, like, do you experience ancient and contemporary architecture differently or similarly? Like, is it something radically disjunctive because the tools and the materials are different? Or is it sort of one long continuum of human endeavor? Like, when you look at an ancient pyramid, you say, I could have built that.
I'm trying to, there's a wonderful thing that Gertrude Stein said. You know, the object is always the same, or the idea is always the same, but it's the people who look at it who are different, not the architecture. The architecture belongs to its time. You know, ancient architecture, you're not going to get steel and plastic, you know. It's made of the earth, and, you know, it's a wonderful way to think about how civilizations change. You read, think of what I was talking about Montreal, the buildings that exist now in Montreal that I'm photographing, that we photographed and then that I'm writing about, that the fact is that through them you can see the society. And in ancient, you know, we don't have very many, Pythagoras, various people who have written about architecture in Greece, for example, and or of course a huge amount on the Baroque, but and these are, it's there are windows into society.
Mon questionnement était le fait que d'emblée, toujours quand on monte un livre, on combine des moments singuliers photographiques en paires, possiblement, où il y a bien des façons, mais en tout cas, dans le cas présent, on a beaucoup de paires. Et évidemment, vous avez articulé à l'intérieur de certaines images soit un mapping qui produit un dispositif spatial d'agencement des images entre elles, en 3 ou en séquence, et ça implique du temps autant que du découpage spatial. Mais néanmoins, le livre produit toutes sortes de relations entre les images paires, qui sont parfois évidemment formelles, mais aussi qui relatent l'expérience du regardeur, déplacement de point de vue, tout ça, et aussi parfois très narrative ou très sémantique relativement au sujet. Et ma question, c'est un peu pour David aussi. Comment ça s'est fait, ce editing-là? Parce que j'ai pas eu le temps de voir le livre.
Pardon?
Hmm?
Comment
se construit ou comment le dialogue s'est fait entre David et vous pour produire ces différentes variations d'assemblage des images?
C'était formidable. Alors, on a commencé, comme je dis, on disait bon, 200 photographies. Alors, et puis, les sujets, alors on ne savait pas exactement, j'avais oublié, il y avait des photographies qui remontaient très, très loin. Alors, on savait qu'il y avait des pays différents, il y avait des époques différentes et tout ça. Et finalement, il y avait beaucoup, pour commencer, surtout dans l'âge, la meilleure âgée, parce que c'était là où c'était mes premières photographies de voyage. Et puis après ça, il y avait évidemment des photographies qui étaient dans des villes différentes. Et il y avait, je ne sais pas, tous les sujets qu'on a touchés ce soir, au fond. Et David a choisi, mais je vais demander à David d'en parler. David.
C'était vraiment une collaboration. J'ai pris du temps à vraiment apprendre ce que Phyllis, elle aimait. C'est sûr, il y a des certains trucs qu'elle aime voir dans les photos. Fait que je voulais apprendre ça, mais en même temps, je voulais vraiment... je pense qu'elle a mis beaucoup de... She put a lot of trust in my taste and would trust me to present her, my favorite images, basically. And we would work from that because, I think you might have said, Phyllis, that it was 3,000 images or something, but it was actually, it was a very large number of images that we started with. It was around 80,000 images, I believe, I looked through.
What? I thought it was 3,000.
Yeah. if you take all of the formats into consideration, yeah. So. But I think once we had established, that I sort of understood what Phyllis was looking for in the book, and that she trusted my taste, that I was able to come with a smaller selection of images that we would then go through together to decide what would eventually go in the book.
Merci pour cette question. Non, c'était vraiment... Vous savez, on aurait pu faire des livres tout à fait différents. J'avais commencé tout au début, pensant qu'on allait le faire blanc et noir, les photos en couleur, et puis les photos avec Instagram, n'est-ce pas? Mais un peu stupide, ça. C'est un peu primitif, n'est-ce pas? Alors, mais c'était avec les choix que David a eu, et puis parfois, sur certaines images qu'il me montrait, qui sortaient, alors ils m'ont fait penser à d'autres choses, à d'autres personnes. Par exemple, les photographies des personnes, parce que Hester a parlé qu'il y a beaucoup de personnes dans le livre, mais ça n'a jamais été... J'ai jamais dit, oh, il y a un tel qui doit être dans le livre, n'est-ce pas? C'était toujours, il avait trouvé des photos, peut-être 1 ou 2 personnes. J'ai demandé qu'il recherche, mais autrement, c'était des photos qu'il avait trouvées.
Merci. Je pense qu'on est rendu à la fin de nos questions. All right. So I'm Sarah Mitchell from the bookstore, and I just want to say a very hearty thank you. Merci de nous avoir rejoints ce soir sur place et virtuellement. J'aimerais d'abord remercier grandement Phyllis et Hester d'avoir partagé avec nous quelques histoires derrière ce recueil et de nous avoir donné un petit avant-goût du prochain livre à paraître avec Lars Muller et le CCA.